Field medic found her fading in ice, carried her through storm. For 3 days. The aftermath of the crash was a suffocating hush, broken only by the ticking of cooling alloys and the faint hiss of escaping vapor. Powdery snow had already begun to blanket the fractured hull of the Arkan scout ship, erasing the jagged wound it had gouged into the ice fields of Oris 9. Mason picked his way through the debris, his movements measured and efficient, a man who understood the dangers of deep cold. His visor scrolled survival stats, numbers that meant he had minutes, not hours. His boots crunched softly as he moved, each step calculated. Above him, the exposed framework of the ship's belly groaned as it settled deeper into the snow. Mason kept his breathing even, counting each inhalation against the urgent red glow of his oxygen monitor. He skirted a shattered display, ducked beneath a jagged rib of hull, and paused as his suit's microheaters stuttered against the bitter air. "Report!" came Felix's voice, sharp and urgent, over the comm. Mason flinched, pulse jumping. He steadied himself. "No sign. Starboard corridors blocked. Bridge crews gone." His voice was flat, clipped, as if detachment could keep the cold at bay. His beams swept across tangled wiring sparking in the gloom, illuminating the scorched, battered interior. Air filters struggled, their whine uneven, infusing the air with the tang of burnt insulation and metal. He paused beside what had once been a med bay, now a splintered ruin, biotanks shattered, clear fluid frozen in brittle arcs. The objective was simple: retrieve data. But Mason's instincts as a field medic tugged him onward, searching for something unnamed. He pressed his gloved palm to a twisted panel, feeling for the faintest tremor, any suggestion that someone, anyone, remained. He lied to his team, masking the ache in his chest with practiced ease. "Might be an auxiliary cell," he said, eyes fixed on the flickering display that told him nothing. Felix responded with a curt order, but Mason was already tuning him out, drawn deeper into the ship's dark heart. He climbed over a collapsed beam, boots slipping on ice slicked with hydraulic fluid, and entered what had once been the crew quarters. Gravity had failed here, and debris floated in slow, spectral drifts: photographs, shattered tablets, a child's carved trinket. Mason's light brushed the wall, picking out the arcane glyphs scratched into the metal, symbols for hope and safe passage. He swallowed, throat raw. Then, movement. Not mechanical, but organic. A faint, pulsing glow, weak and uneven, bleeding through a mound of shattered plating. Mason's heartbeat accelerated, adrenaline sharpening his senses. He dropped to one knee, hands working quickly to clear the debris. The metal screeched as he heaved it aside, urgency lending him strength. Beneath, entangled in a snarl of cables, was an arcane woman. Her suit was torn, one arm pinned at an unnatural angle. Short, dark hair clung to her forehead, plastered to skin so pale it seemed to glow. Intricate patterns, silver and iridescent, swirled across her exposed collarbone. Her long, delicate fingers twitched, spasming around a cracked vial at her belt, from which viscous, luminous liquid seeped, tracing glowing lines over her abdomen. Her eyes snapped open, icy gray, fierce, filled with raw fury. For an instant, she looked at Mason as if she might rip out his throat, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Mason's hand hovered over his medkit, hesitating. He activated his comm, voice steady and cold as he reported, "Hostile alive." Felix's reply was instant, the order cutting through static. "Leave her, Mason. No survivors. That's an order." Mason looked down at her, saw the pain, the stubborn spark of life in her eyes. Enemy, victim, dying. He tightened his jaw, decision crystallizing. "Negative, Lieutenant," he said, defiance clear in every syllable. "She's critical, but I can stabilize her. I'm bringing her in." Static hissed, then Felix's voice fractured and faded. Outside, the wind rose, the blizzard striking with a vengeance, shrieking through the ruptured hull. Mason wasted no time. He freed her arm with careful, practiced movements, ignoring her attempts to jerk away. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale ragged. He pressed a patch to her neck, stemming the blood, then looped her arm over his shoulder. The storm howled as he staggered from the wreck, snow battering his visor, comms fizzing with interference. The world narrowed to the weight in his arms and the treacherous, shifting white. Step by step, he pressed forward, her life flickering against his chest as he shielded her from the wind. Thermal imaging guided him to a shallow cavern, a fragile haven gouged into the ice. The cave was small, its ceiling low, walls glimmering with frost. Mason set her down, his breath a plume of fog. Her condition worsened, skin pale as moonlight, lips darkening to violet. She shivered violently, lost between consciousness and fevered dreams. Mason worked quickly. He examined the cracked vial, sniffed the leaking compound, a stabilizer, alien biochemistry humming beneath its surface. He sliced away her ruined suit, hands gentle but efficient, revealing more of the silver patterns swirling over her skin, a map of her lineage, or perhaps her wounds. Hypothermia was winning. Only direct warmth could save her. He stripped off his armor, shivering as icy air bit at his skin, and wrapped her in thermal blankets. He pressed her to his chest, sharing what heat he could. Her back against him, she trembled uncontrollably, her breaths hitching in his arms. Mason murmured words he barely understood, soothing as much for himself as for her. His arms closed around her, his face buried in her cold, dark hair. The world outside was a blur of shrieking wind and ice. Here, there was only survival. She awoke, body rigid, struggling against his hold. "Don't touch me, Taryn," she rasped, her voice a blade of defiance even as she shivered. "Lie still or you'll die," he replied, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "I'm Mason. Right now, I'm all that stands between you and death." Her resistance ebbed, exhaustion sapping her strength. She slumped against him, breath warming fractionally. Mason watched her face, noting every tremor, the way her eyelashes fluttered against her cheeks, the strange, otherworldly softness of her skin. After a moment, she whispered, "Why?" Mason's reply was simple, the truth laid bare. "You're my responsibility." Her logic faltered, confusion and suspicion flickering in her eyes. But something shifted, a flicker of trust, or at least the absence of hate. Outside, the storm raged, merciless and endless. But in the cave, as the blizzard battered the world to white, a fragile bond began to form, delicate as thawing ice. Mason's scanner finished its analysis, the device humming softly in his gloved hand. The readout glimmered in pale blue across his visor. Not a toxin, but a restorative, strands of data dancing in unfamiliar patterns. The compound was coded for a non-human genome, alien markers spliced with something almost lyrical. Harmless to him, but vital for someone else. It was a riddle that gnawed at his mind, chewing through every protocol he'd ever trusted. The storm outside eased its brutal assault, wind dropping from a banshee's howl to a mournful sigh. Pale light filtered through the thin ice at the cave's mouth, casting Nira in spectral relief. She lay cocooned in the thermal blankets, lips parted in shallow, struggling breaths. When Mason knelt beside her, she tried to push herself up, failed, and let out a frustrated sound too quiet to echo. He scanned her again, frowning at the results. Her vitals were stabilizing, but her strength hadn't returned. "You need to move," he said, voice soft but insistent. "We can't stay here. They'll come looking." Nira blinked, her eyes slow to focus. "I can't. I'll carry you." He rifled through the emergency kit, pulling straps free, fashioning a crude harness. As he worked, Nira studied him in silence, gaze sharp despite her exhaustion. When he lifted her onto his back, she weighed less than he expected, muscle and sinew honed for low gravity, not the crushing cold of Orus 9. He cinched her to him, feeling her breath, cold but steady, on the side of his neck. The journey began with a single step into knee-deep snow, the world outside the cave dazzling white, sky a bruised canvas above the endless tundra. Mason trudged forward, boots breaking the crust with each stride. Naira's head rested against his shoulder, her arms limp around his chest. To keep his mind from freezing, Mason spoke. Earth isn't all cities, you know. There are woods, green so green it hurts your eyes, and lakes. In summer you can swim until the sun sets, and still the water's warm. His voice was low, more for himself than for her. There was a place near my home, willow trees all along the bank. I'd go there as a kid, just to listen to the wind. He didn't know if she listened. Maybe she slept. But the words anchored him, drew a line from the man he had been to the man he was now, alone, hauling an enemy through a frozen hell, haunted by questions he couldn't answer. Hours blurred into aching muscle and numb fingers. When he finally stopped, sheltered by the lee of a jagged rock, he set Naira down with infinite care. Her eyes fluttered, lids heavy with exhaustion, but she was awake. Mason pulled out the scanner again, running a deeper analysis on the compounds smeared across her suit and skin. The data spooled in, more complex than before. Genetic markers coalesced, shifting into patterns that made him freeze. It didn't match the arcane genome. He stared, realization dawning. "Sorry," he murmured, almost to himself. Naira's lips parted, a tremor in her voice. "You know the word?" Mason nodded, mind racing. The Lysari, engineered by the Dominion, subjugated, their abilities locked down by chemical chains and genetic prisons. The compound wasn't just a restorative, it was a cure, a key. He looked at her, seeing past the cuts and bruises. It's meant for your people. It frees them." Nira's eyes filled with something like hope, fragile and bright. "It frees them," she whispered, voice rough but resolute. "Their minds, their will. The Dominion can't hold them if we have this." Mason felt the world shift, the old lines of friend and foe blurring until they meant nothing at all. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a revolution. He stowed the scanner, knelt beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He could feel her uncertainty, her fear, but also something new. Trust, tentative as dawn. When he bent to lift her again, Naira surprised him. Her arms wrapped around his neck, not limp this time, but holding on, her long, graceful fingers brushing the bare skin at the edge of his collar. A silent gesture. "Thank you," or "Perhaps I see you." Mason's heart beat faster. He shifted her weight and rose. As they pressed on, something subtle changed. Naira began to guide him, her senses sharper than his, picking out subtle gradients in the landscape, warning him when the wind shifted or the snow grew dangerously thin. She pointed once, a slender finger indicating a path that would shelter them from the worst of the cold. Mason listened, adjusting his route. In return, he taught her the small tricks of survival: how to ration the heat packs, how to breathe through a cloth to warm the air, how to spot the telltale shimmer of thin ice. During their breaks, their conversations deepened. Mason found himself telling her stories of Earth, of cities and chaos, of his mother's laughter and the time he almost drowned in a flooded subway. Naira told him of Lysari myth, of stars that sang and dreamt, of what it meant to fight for a future you'd never see. One night, as they crouched behind a wind-scoured boulder, Naira laughed at something he said, really laughed, a sound so startlingly human it made Mason's chest ache. He turned to look at her, caught off guard. "You laugh like you mean it," he said, grinning. She tilted her head, smile fading to something softer. "I haven't laughed in a long time." Her hand brushed his as she steadied herself. A fleeting contact, but it lingered. The moment was fragile, but the next morning, danger returned with the unerring precision of fate. As they crossed a flat expanse of ice, Mason's HUD flickered. A warning. An arcane seeker drone swept low over the horizon, its sensors angling toward the snow, hunting for biosigns. Mason grabbed Naira's arm, pulling her down into the shadow of a ridge. The drone's hum grew louder, a predator scenting blood. "They're tracking you," Mason said. "We can't outrun it." Naira's eyes narrowed, calculating. "My wrist device, if I overload it, it'll give off a false signal, enough to lure it." "It'll bring it right to us," Mason replied. She met his gaze, unflinching. "That's why you need a charge. When it comes close, you detonate." "We can take it out, then run." He hesitated, weighing risk against certainty. Then he nodded, handing her a thermal charge from his belt. Naira's fingers flew, reconfiguring the device, her breath coming faster. "Ready?" Mason asked, his voice pitched low. She offered a grim smile. "Ready." Naira twisted the device, a high whine building as it powered up. She flung it across the ice. The drone veered, its sensors locking on. In the span of a heartbeat, Mason set the thermal charge, counted down in his head, then triggered it. The explosion bloomed, a rush of heat and light. The drone's sensors faltered. Mason raised his rifle, took the shot, and the machine tumbled to the ground in a spray of metal and flame. He sprinted to Naira's side. She was on her knees, spent. The last reserves of her strength poured into their survival. Mason caught her as she sagged, his arms sliding around her. In the aftermath, adrenaline and survival stripped away the last barriers. The storm was gone, replaced by a hollow silence. Mason brushed Naira's hair from her face, his touch feather-light, tracing the silver lines at her temple. Her eyes opened, searching his for some answer. There was no hatred now, only raw trust, unguarded and fierce. Mason cupped her cheek, thumb grazing her lips. Naira exhaled, shivering, not from cold, but from something deeper. Mason leaned in, their breath mingling, and their lips met in a desperate, wind-chapped kiss. For a moment, the cold vanished, the universe shrinking to just the two of them, one heartbeat, shared between enemies no longer. The extraction site lay in a ravine, both Terran and Arcane squads closing in from opposite sides, their armored shadows flickering through the blizzard haze. Mason knelt beside Naira in the shelter of a jagged boulder, clutching the scavenged comm unit. Her head lolled against his shoulder, eyes half closed, breath a shallow flutter beneath the battered collar of her suit. She was barely conscious, her inner glow faded to a faint shimmer. Every second, the lines of silver across her skin dimmed further. "Stay with me, Naira," Mason murmured, fingers trembling as he checked her pulse. "Just a little longer. You hear me?" She nodded, a movement so slight he felt it more than saw it. Her voice was a whisper, more thought than sound. "Not much longer, if we stay." He forced a smile she couldn't see. "That's why we're not staying." Mason's gaze swept the ravine. Terran armor glinted on one ridge, arcane helms on the other. They would be pincered, slaughtered, unless they vanished first. He ran the drone's comm unit through a quick diagnostic, its systems barely functional after the firefight. Jace's voice crackled in Mason's earpiece, strained and urgent. "Extraction windows closing, Mason. You got eyes on the shuttle?" "Negative," Mason replied. "They're converging on our beacon." "I'm improvising." Felix's voice cut through the channel, amplified and icy. "You are not authorized to improvise. Surrender the asset, Mason. That's a direct order." Mason ignored him, fingers dancing across the comm's cracked screen. He coded a distress call, mimicking a shuttle crash on the far side of the ravine, piggybacking arcane encryption over Terran protocols. The message pulsed into the ether, a digital ghost. "Give them something to chase," he muttered. "Not us." He slipped the comm back into his pack and studied the ravine's western wall. Through the blowing snow, a faint sulphurous plume caught his eye. A fissure, lava-warmed, hidden from sensor sweeps. He'd seen it on the topographical scan hours earlier. Now it was their only chance. He shifted Nira's weight, slinging her across his back, securing her with the makeshift harness. She clung to him, breath ragged against his neck. "Hold on," Mason said softly. "This will hurt, but it's better than dying out here." She managed a ghost of a smile. "Go, Taryn. I trust you." Mason picked his way to the fissure's edge, knees trembling with exhaustion. The opening was narrow, rimed with frost, and the heat rolling from within stung his face. The crawl inside was punishing, jagged basalt scraping his armor, sulphurous steam choking the air, visibility down to a hand's breadth. The tunnel twisted, spiraled, the only light the faint pulse of Naira's skin fading as her strength waned. He pulled them forward inch by inch, every muscle screaming. At times, Naira's grip slackened and he'd pause, feeling for her heartbeat, willing her to hold on. The heat inside the fissure kept the worst of the cold at bay, but the air was heavy and thick, each breath a labor. Naira's eyes flickered open, gaze unfocused. "Why, help me?" Mason crawled, shoulders scraping the stone. "Because it's right. Because I can't let them use you, or what's inside you." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, voice barely audible. "You could have left. You didn't." He glanced back at her, sweat trickling down his face. "I don't leave people behind. Not anymore." The tunnel finally widened, opening to a thin crack of daylight. Mason dragged them out, blinking into chaos. The extraction zone had devolved into a maelstrom. Terran and Archaean soldiers traded fire across the ravine, blinded by the snow and by Mason's false distress signal. Energy bolts scorched the ice, cutting blue-white lines through the haze. Mason saw Felix's squad, weapons drawn, scanning for the quarry that was no longer there. On the opposite slope, arcane infantry advanced, equally confused. Jace's voice returned, this time closer. "Mason, I'm in position. I'll cover you. Go!" Mason didn't hesitate. He hoisted Nira into his arms and broke cover, sprinting into the open. Enemy fire erupted, bolts sizzling past, melting snow into sudden steam. Felix's amplified voice boomed across the field. "Mason! Surrender the asset. Stand down or we fire." But Mason pressed on, shield for the woman in his arms. Naira's head rested against his chest, eyes shut, trusting him completely. He could feel her heartbeat, weak but insistent, against his ribs. Jace, the squad rookie, appeared atop a boulder, laying down a barrage of suppressive fire. "Go, Mason! I've got you! Move!" Shots hammered into Mason's armor, glancing off his shoulder, burning hot lines across his back. He gritted his teeth, legs pumping, boots slipping in the slush. The shuttle's ramp yawned open, a beacon in the storm. Mason dove inside, sealing the hatch just as a hail of energy bolts scored the outer hull. Inside, the world shrank to silence. Mason staggered to the medbay, lowering Naira into the medpod. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, searching his face. He brushed the hair from her brow. "Stay with me, Naira. I need you to fight now." She nodded, too weak for words. Mason activated the pod, his fingers deft but trembling. The med system scanned her vitals, flashing red with every pass. He calibrated the dosage, halting the compound's effects, stabilizing her fading pulse. The pod's field glimmered, wrapping her in a cocoon of warm blue light. Outside, the shuttle shook as the battle raged on. Mason slumped against the bulkhead, sweat cooling on his skin. He watched from the viewport as Terran and arcane forces realized their quarry had vanished. The fighting faltered, confusion spreading like wildfire. Jace appeared in the cockpit, face streaked with soot, grinning breathlessly. "Did you get her?" Mason nodded, exhaustion radiating from every pore. "She's stable, for now." Jace's eyes darted to the comms array. Felix is still out there. Orders are coming in. Return to base, stand down, report for debrief. Mason wiped blood from his brow, every instinct screaming that if he obeyed, Naira, and the secret she carried, would never be free. He slid into the pilot's chair, checking nav systems. The shuttle's engines rumbled, hungry for command. He keyed in a new course, bypassing the known safe routes, setting a vector for the lawless border worlds. There, far from Dominion eyes, the Lissari enclaves waited, hidden, unbowed, free. Jace hovered in the hatchway. Are you sure about this? We'll be fugitives. Mason glanced back at Naira, sleeping in the blue glow of the medpod. He remembered her laughter, her trust, the moment their lips had met amid the chaos and the cold. He felt the weight of the future shifting on his shoulders. I'm sure, he said. For the first time in years, I'm sure. The shuttle powered up, engines screaming as they lifted off. Below, the ravine shrank away, the last traces of Terran and Archaean command dissolving in the storm. Mason's hands were steady on the controls, his heart lighter than it had been in a lifetime. He was no longer just a medic. He was a fugitive, a rebel, and, at last, free. Half a year passed in the cramped world of their stolen ship, the Wraith. Mason had revived Nira in the early days with a careful cocktail of inhibitors, keeping her condition stable, her abilities suppressed and undetectable. Now, as starlight filtered through the battered port, she was simply herself, no longer fugitive, weapon, or asset, but a woman who met his gaze with clear eyes and a steady heart. Life aboard the Wraith had a rhythm all its own. The corridors were narrow, every surface bearing the memory of hurried repairs and near misses. The engine whined with its own language, a reminder of the thin line they walked between freedom and pursuit. Yet Mason found a strange peace in the routine, waking to the sound of Naira's quiet breathing, the ship's hum, and the steady thrum of his own pulse. Their bond, forged in the crucible of crisis, deepened in the small spaces between danger and duty. In the mornings, Mason watched Naira meditate in the galley, legs folded, eyes closed, a tranquil pillar in the storm of their lives. She always seemed aware of him, no matter how silent his approach. Sometimes, when he passed, she would open her eyes and offer a smile, a soft, private signal that he was welcome in her world. After breakfast, they sparred on the makeshift mat Mason had rigged in the cargo hold. Combat drills became their language, a conversation of movement and breath. Naira was quick, her style fluid and unpredictable, but Mason matched her with dogged persistence. Each bout ended the same way, breathless laughter, a shared look of mutual respect, hands lingering on each other's shoulders a beat too long. Evenings were for language lessons. Mason struggled with Lissari syntax, his Terran tongue tripping over musical consonants. Nira, patient but fierce, corrected him mercilessly. Again, she would insist, her lips quirking when he mispronounced a word. You just called my mother a starfish. The lessons, inevitably, devolved into heated debates, sometimes philosophical, sometimes playful, until laughter surrendered to kisses, and debate to the press of bodies and the warmth of tangled limbs. Their love, fierce and gentle, became a quiet certainty. The Wraith drifted from system to system, always one step ahead of bounty hunters and Dominion patrols. They traded favors for parts, forged new identities when old ones grew too hot. Mason watched Naira move through the universe, confident, luminous, and no longer afraid. When Station Varel appeared on the nav charts, Mason felt tension coil in his chest. The station loomed at the edge of a dying star, a den of danger built from generations of rust, neon, and secrets. Bounty hunters prowled the docks, their eyes sharp for the price on Mason's head. Arcane agents drifted through the crowd, faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They disembarked together, Mason's hand hovering near his sidearm, Naira's presence at his back a steady anchor. The air was thick with engine fumes, voices in a dozen languages, the distant thrum of violence always near. Naira scanned the crowd. Cade will be waiting in the east hangar. He won't trust us unless I go alone. Mason shook his head. We go together. No more splitting up unless we have to. She smiled, a flash of gratitude. As you wish, Taryn. They moved as a seamless team, navigating the chaos of the station. Mason scanned every face, every shadow. Naira led the way, her posture relaxed but alert, blending into the eddies of the crowd. They skirted clusters of mercenaries, slipped through maintenance corridors, and ducked under flickering signs in a language Mason didn't recognize. Halfway to the rendezvous, the trap sprang. Terran operatives closed from the left, arcane soldiers from the right, both factions converging with practiced precision. Mason's eyes narrowed, hand tightening on his weapon. Ambush, he hissed. Go! Naira darted forward, her motion a blur, drawing the bulk of the pursuit. Arcane soldiers shouted, scattering after her. Mason wheeled the other way, sliding behind a stack of crates, dropping 2 Terran operatives with well-placed stun rounds. He moved like a ghost, silent and ruthless, using the chaos to his advantage. Naira led her pursuers through the labyrinthine lower decks, doubling back at critical junctures, leaving false trails. She ducked into a storage bay, disabling the lights with a flick of her wrist, then vanished into a maintenance shaft. Her breath came fast, heart pounding, but she felt alive, more alive than she had since childhood. Mason neutralized the last of the Terran agents, disabling their comms before slipping away. He checked his wrist beacon. Naira's signal pulsed steady, a star in the darkness. He retraced his route, nerves singing, until he found her waiting in the shadow of an airlock, cheeks flushed but eyes bright. Took you long enough, she teased. He grinned, pulling her close for a brief, fierce embrace. You're welcome. Their coordination was flawless, a dance of trust and necessity. They pressed on together, weaving through alleys until they reached the east hangar. Cade waited in the gloom, a tall figure draped in a patched cloak, eyes sharp and wary. He watched them approach, one hand hidden beneath his cloak. You brought company, Nira. He's earned his place, she replied, stepping forward. Are you Cade? He nodded, voice quiet but resolute. I am. And I am Lisari, freeborn, one of the few the Dominion failed to break. He lifted his wrist, showing a shimmering mark that matched the patterns on Naira's skin. Mason studied him. You're the contact? Cade's gaze flickered over Mason, then settled on Naira. Your mission, the compound you carry, do you know what it means? Nira's chin lifted. It's the last of the 3 keys. The others were lost with the arcane rebels. If I fail, there's no awakening, no freedom for our kind. Cade's expression softened. Then you are the hope of our people. You and your companion. He offered a hand. The path ahead will be perilous. We are hunted, but if we succeed, every Lysari in the galaxy will awaken. Mason felt the gravity of it settle on his shoulders. He nodded, silent promise passing between him and Naira. Back aboard the Wraith, Cade departed with coordinates for the next rendezvous, leaving Mason and Naira in the hush of the ship. Mason secured the hatch, checking sensors for pursuit. The engine's soft purr was the only sound. Naira stood at the viewport, her silhouette framed by distant stars. She turned, uncertainty in her eyes. You could walk away, Mason. The fight ahead, it's not yours. Not really. He crossed to her, covering her hand with his own, fingers gentle but sure. Now the whole Lysari race is my patient, he said, voice low. I don't walk away from my patients. A smile broke across her face, slow, luminous, fierce. She leaned into him, the weight of destiny lightened by their shared certainty. Their kiss was slow, sealing a partnership of equals and lovers. The universe outside spun on, but inside the wraith, there was only the warmth of promise and the unspoken vow that, together, they would face whatever came next. With their goal clear, Mason and Naira prepared for the journey to Alira Prime, deep in the nebulae expanse. The final coordinates burned in the Wraith's nav systems, a promise and a threat, every star on their chart a checkpoint between hope and annihilation. Cade stood in the galley, hands braced on the edge of the table, his voice taut as a wire. "This is it," he told them. "Once we transmit the awakening sequence from Alira Prime, every Lisari will feel it. No more chains, no more secrets. But if you're caught, the Dominion and the Coalition will make sure there's nothing left of us, freedom for billions, or eternal slavery." He let the words hang, heavy with the weight of history. Mason nodded, absorbing the gravity of their mission. Naira's eyes shone, determined and unyielding. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady. The Wraith became a haven of their new life, a floating island of battered metal and patchwork comfort. Mason took to repairing the aging systems with a singular devotion, his hands steady as he coaxed the engines into another round of improbable endurance. Each hiss of plasma weld, each spark of circuitry, felt like a prayer for tomorrow. Naira gathered intelligence from every channel she could crack, sifting through data streams for news of patrols, bounties, and coded warnings. She left notes for Mason in the margin of his repair logs, a joke in Lisari, a scrawled star chart, a memory of something he'd said weeks before. Their relationship deepened in these small rituals. Meals were hurried or drawn out depending on the threat level, but always shared, knees touching beneath the table, eyes lingering in the half-light. Sometimes they spoke of the mission, dissecting strategy and risk. Other times, the conversation wandered. Favorite childhood stories, the first time Mason had stitched his own wounds, the way Naira's mother had taught her to listen for the music of the stars. Nights aboard the Wraith were quiet, but never lonely. Mason found comfort in the sound of Nira's voice, the brush of her fingers as she passed him tools, the way she curled beside him in the narrow bunk, fitting her body to his as if she'd always been meant to. Her presence was a steady flame against the darkness of the void, but threats loomed, shadows gathering at every jump. Both the Terran Coalition and Arcane Dominion had set bounties so high that every drifter, mercenary, and would-be hero in 100 systems now hunted them. Each message intercepted brought news of closer patrols, new codes to break, new dangers to outwit. They became experts in vanishing. Mason rewired transponder signals until even he struggled to recognize their signature. Naira wrote encryption routines that left pursuit vessels chasing ghosts. They threaded asteroid belts, using the swirling debris to mask their approach, and crossed dead space where no law reached. Sometimes they ran silent for days, oxygen scrubbers on low, whispering only when absolutely necessary. Tension mounted with every new report, every near miss. One morning, a Dominion scout ship appeared off their port bow, sensors scouring the darkness. Mason shut down the drives, heart pounding, as Naira slipped into the weapons seat, hands ready but steady. The scout drifted past, and only when it vanished did they allow themselves to breathe. Despite the danger, their trust never faltered. They moved as a single mind, anticipation and understanding woven into every shared glance and half-spoken word. Together, they were more than fugitives. They were partners, rebels, and, against all odds, in love. One night, after a particularly narrow escape, a collision warning flashing crimson as Mason angled the Wraith through a labyrinth of tumbling asteroids, Naira found him alone in the cockpit. The stars spilled across the viewport, endless and silent. Mason sat slouched in the pilot's seat, eyes fixed on the glittering expanse, hands trembling from adrenaline and fatigue. She said nothing at first, only padded across the deck and settled into his lap, arms winding around his neck. Mason let out a long breath, his head dropping to rest against her shoulder. Tomorrow we might die, Naira whispered, her voice brushing his ear like a caress. He turned to her, searching her face in the dim glow of instrument lights. Yeah, I know. She stroked his hair, her touch grounding him. Tonight, we live. Their lovemaking was slow and reverent, bodies moving together in a rhythm that had nothing to do with urgency or fear. Mason traced the silver patterns on Naira's skin, memorizing every curve and line, each touch a promise. She kissed him with a tenderness that made his heart ache, as if she could imprint hope on his bones. Wrapped together in the cockpit, they let themselves forget the war, the mission, the world beyond the hull. In that small, precious space, they celebrated the simple fact of being alive. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, Naira's head on Mason's chest, his fingers drawing lazy circles along her back. The silence between them was full of meaning, shared breaths, soft laughter, the certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. As they neared Illyra Prime, tension seeped back into Mason's bones. The blue-green jewel hung ahead, cloaked in clouds and promise. For hours he watched it grow in the viewport, his mind a storm of doubts and possibilities. He found Naira in the galley, double-checking the encrypted data packet they would transmit to the Lissari network. She looked up as he entered, reading the uncertainty in his eyes. "Are we right to do this?" Mason asked, voice low, words heavy. "What if it's not enough? Or worse, what if it's too much? What if people die because we tried?" Naira closed the data slate and crossed to him, slipping her arms around his waist. She pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling, the closeness steadying them both. "There's no right in war, only what you can live with," she whispered, her words both a balm and a challenge. "We can't promise victory, only that we tried, and that we did not stand aside and watch the world burn." Mason's doubts softened in the warmth of her certainty. He wrapped his arms around her, letting the fear and hope, the questions and answers, settle between them like stardust. Outside, Illyra Prime waited, and with it, the fate of billions. Inside the Wraith, Mason and Naira stood together, holding tight to each other, their love alight against the coming dark. Their approach to Illyra Prime was fraught with peril, Dominion patrols, pirates, and the nebula's wrathful storms. The Wraith shuddered beneath Mason's hands as he coaxed the battered ship through a corridor of swirling ion clouds. Energy crackled in streaks of violet and blue, dancing across the hull. Every sensor reading was suspect, every blip a possible harbinger of death. But Mason's grip was steady, his focus absolute. "Another phantom signature off port," he murmured, eyes darting across the flickering display. Naira stood at his shoulder, her presence calm and cool despite the chaos outside. "That's just ion scatter," she said, her voice low. "Drop elevation by 4 degrees. If you see a double spike, that's a real patrol." Mason nodded, trusting her instincts as much as his own. The Wraith banked, slipping beneath a ragged arc of nebula where pirate vessels often lurked. For several tense minutes, only the ship's engine whine and the distant rumble of the storm filled the cockpit. A warning klaxon blared, a Dominion cutter, unmistakable. Mason snapped the thrusters to minimal output, letting the Wraith drift on residual momentum. "Hold your breath," he whispered. Naira's hand closed over his, a silent promise. "We'll make it." The patrol slid past, sensors ghosted by Naira's jamming code. When the danger faded, Mason exhaled, his shoulders sagging. That was close. Naira allowed herself a small smile. If it was easy, it wouldn't be ours. They broke through the worst of the nebula's reach as Illyra Prime came into view. A world wreathed in clouds, its orbit ringed with satellites and defense drones. Mason angled the ship toward the shadowed crescent, following Naira's directions through a backdoor approach. They slipped into a traffic lane, hiding among merchant freighters and civilian shuttles, each step calculated and rehearsed. The distribution hub floated just above the atmosphere, a sprawl of metal arms and docking rings, humming with coded activity. Cade's agents waited in Docking Bay 17, faces hooded, bodies tense. Mason felt every muscle in his body coil, senses on a knife's edge. Naira squeezed his arm before they stepped out, a silent transfer of strength. Inside the hub, the air was thick with ozone and the scent of nervous sweat. Mason and Naira moved through the corridors like ghosts, their every step guided by encrypted instructions Cade had sent. At a secure terminal nestled between stacks of storage crates, Cade himself awaited, flanked by Lisari loyalists. His eyes gleamed with purpose. "You have it?" Cade asked, voice barely above a whisper. Naira nodded, producing the data crystal, the last of the 3 keys. She slotted it into the terminal. Mason watched as Naira's hands danced over the controls, her focus absolute. Cade leaned close. "Once you initiate, there's no turning back." Naira looked to Mason. He held her gaze, unwavering. "Let's end this." She pressed the final sequence. The hub's central core pulsed with encrypted signals, the machinery thrumming as the awakening spread, first through the hub's network, then bursting outward along hidden channels, racing across the stars. Mason felt the change in the air, a tremor that was almost physical. All over the galaxy, Lisari minds would be stirring, memories and power unshackled, hope rekindled. Alarms blared. Dominion ships, their approach vectors painted in angry red across the display screens. The hub shuddered as defensive shields came online, and Cade's agents scattered to their escape routes. Cade's voice was urgent. "They're coming! Get out! Now!" Mason seized Naira's hand, pulling her through the chaos. The hub's corridors flashed with warning lights. Blasters fired in the distance, a symphony of panic, They sprinted back to the Wraith, dodging fleeing technicians and enemy squads, the sounds of battle a growing storm behind them. As they neared the airlock, Naira stumbled, nearly collapsing. Mason caught her, his voice fierce. "Stay with me. We're almost there." "I'm with you," she gasped, forcing herself upright. Inside the Wraith, Mason slammed the hatch shut and fired the engines. Enemy ships converged, weapons trained on their small vessel. Mason's hands danced across the controls, pushing the ship beyond its limits. "Hang on," he called. The Wraith shot through the maze of docking rings, weaving between fire and wreckage, Naira at his side calling out enemy positions. Energy bolts hammered the shields. Mason banked sharply, spinning through the gravity well, every move a gamble. As they cleared the hub's outer ring, the comm crackled, Cade's voice, fierce and exultant. "You've given us a future. Find yours." Mason felt the words settle deep inside him. He looked at Naira, sweat streaking her brow, eyes luminous with exhaustion and pride. "We did it," he breathed. But there was no time for celebration. Dominion ships pursued, chasing the Wraith into the clouds of the nebulae expanse. Mason's navigation was equal parts instinct and desperation, every leap through the storm a race against death. Naira rerouted power, jamming sensors, guiding them through safe pockets and hidden eddies. Finally, the threat faded. Silence returned, a silence filled with wonder, relief, and the echo of Cade's last words. Back aboard the Wraith, fugitives to both empires, Mason and Naira faced an unknown road. The galaxy was awake, and nothing would ever be the same. For the first time, there were no orders, no codes, no one chasing but the ghost of who they had been. In the quiet after the storm, Naira curled against Mason in their narrow bunk, skin still warm from the chase, heartbeat echoing in his chest. "Where now?" she asked, her voice barely more than a sigh against his skin. He smiled, brushing her dark hair from her face. "Anywhere, everywhere, as long as you're with me." She laughed, the sound soft and bright, filling the small cabin with light. "That is a reckless plan." He kissed her, slow and deep, a promise written in the language of touch. In that moment, There was no war, no empire, only the two of them, wrapped in each other's arms, the ship rocking gently in the currents of the void. Outside, the stars burned, cold, bright, and full of promise. For the first time, the universe belonged to them both. Our story ends here. If you'd like to support us, you can use the Super Thanks button right under the video to leave a tip. It truly helps our team improve the quality of our work. We're grateful to each and every subscriber for being with us. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.